Hi, I'm Dr. Jessica Barker. I am delighted to be speaking to you today about the human side of cybersecurity. To quickly introduce myself, I have been working on the human side of cybersecurity for over 10 years. I work with organisations around the world on their cybersecurity awareness, behaviour and culture programmes, helping them to better manage human risk. I'm the author of the #1 best-selling book, Confident Cybersecurity, and co-author of Cybersecurity ABCs. I speak around the world to organisations from different sectors of different sizes about the human side of cybersecurity. And I'm delighted today to be covering what the human side of cybersecurity is, why people matter when it comes so much to security, and of course, what makes us as human beings susceptible to cyber attacks, particularly social engineering. I'll be ending my discussion by looking at what we can do to better protect ourselves so that we can all be more secure online. So when it comes to people and cybersecurity, where are they? What is the human side? Well, of course, people and cybersecurity, it's everywhere. We can't separate people out from this discussion. If we look at the life cycle of information and technology, from design and development of a piece of technology through to testing, using and abusing that technology or information, and of course sharing and destroying it, we can see that of course people are fundamental at every stage. This is not machines attacking machines. This is not machines acting maliciously. People are involved at every step of the process. And arguably, none more so than when it comes to the impact of technology and of cybersecurity issues. And of course, this applies at home as well as at work. So I hope you will take some lessons and insights that I shared today and not only be able to apply them to your professional life, but also to your personal life as well. I think we all can help to spread this knowledge and this information to help our connections, our friends, family, colleagues, neighbours, whoever it may be in the community, be more secure. Because when we're all more secure, it lifts the security of everyone around us. Who and why? Who is carrying out cyber attacks? And interestingly, why are they doing it? Because different groups and different individuals have different motivations. And when we understand that, we can better understand potentially who would be targeting us, who would be interested in our information. So when it comes to external threat groups of an organisation, we can look at 4 main groups. On the one side, we have the nation-state level attackers. Up until a few years ago, we didn't hear much about the nation-state. And then in recent years, we've heard far more from governments, from states being open about some cyber activity that they potentially have been targeted with. When we talk about the nation-state level of cybersecurity, you will often hear the term APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. This, of course, is because at the nation-state level, there is usually the resource, the time, the motivation to become more advanced and persistent with the form of attack. However, nation-state level attackers will usually begin, like most acting in cyber attacks, and that is beginning with phishing, with social engineering. We've seen a huge rise in phishing and social engineering in recent years, and this can largely be attributed to the fact that this method is used a lot by financially motivated organised criminal gangs. Financially motivated organised criminal gangs are why we have seen such a huge rise in cyber attacks in recent years. They will often act and be organised in a very sophisticated way, almost a professional way, and they are interested in money. They are carrying out their attacks just as they would carry out other crime in the physical world, but they've realised that it is easier, faster, cheaper, less risky, and more likely to succeed. It's also more likely to be more lucrative if they carry out some, at least, of their criminal activity online. We then have the hacktivists, hacking activists, who are not motivated by money, but rather motivated by a political ideology. So hacktivists will usually want to make a point, a political or ideological point. They maybe want to target an organisation to steal information, to embarrass it, or to cause attention, to get attention for the cause that they are trying to further. We then have script kiddies, a term most people are not as familiar with. Script kiddies I like to think of as have-a-go hackers. They aren't necessarily skilled or experienced like other hackers. Instead, they will use code, they will use tools that they download from the internet, they will watch some online tutorials, and they will have a go at hacking. Research suggests that they generally fit the stereotype that we often see in the media of a hacker. So research suggests that they generally will be younger, they generally will be male, and they're usually carrying out their attacks or their attempts to gain kudos with their friends, to show off, to test out their skills, perhaps without realizing the damage that they can cause. That's external to an organization. Internal, we have what's known as malicious insiders. Malicious insiders are individuals who've usually built up a disgruntlement against the organisation that they work for. Occasionally, a malicious insider will be planted in an organisation to carry out or facilitate attacks. Or they could be somebody that is termed in an organisation. Most commonly, they are somebody who's worked in an organisation for a long time. They've been loyal up until the point that they feel a disgruntlement. They may feel they've been picked over for promotion, or they haven't been recognised or rewarded in the way that they feel they deserve. So their psychology will be that they are not doing anything wrong. They will think that they, in fact, are the victim and they are righting a wrong that's been carried out by their organisation. They maybe will steal information for their own purposes, steal it to embarrass the organisation, leak it, sell it for money. Whatever their activity, they will think that they aren't in the wrong and that the organisation has treated them so poorly that actually they're doing what they deserve. Malicious insiders are thankfully quite rare. What we see involved in most incidents when it comes to internal to an organisation is what's known as non-malicious insiders. People like you or me just trying to do a good job, but perhaps the systems haven't been well configured, perhaps they haven't had the training that they need, perhaps they're overburdened, they're receiving too many emails, they're distracted. For one reason or another, they make a mistake. It might be clicking a link in one of those phishing emails sent by financially motivated organised criminals. It might be that they send information to the wrong email address. It might be that they leave some papers lying around that they shouldn't, but they make a mistake that can ultimately be quite damaging to the organisation, but they do so without realising what they have done. It is an accident, and often we find it can be attributed to something beyond the individual, the setup in the organisation, the culture of the organisation, the way the systems have been configured, or a lack of training. How are attacks carried out? Well, the first thing that I want to touch on is a question that I often receive. In fact, I was asked this very morning when I delivered a session elsewhere. I was asked, why would hackers want our data? Why would we be targeted? This came from somebody working in a medium-sized organisation, and they felt like there are bigger targets out there. Why would criminals target us when they could potentially target an organisation that's much bigger, much wealthier? There's two answers to that question. The first answer is that we all handle information that is more sensitive and more valuable than we often realise, recognise or remember. Many of us handling information on a day-to-day basis can become desensitised to the value of that information and the damage that could be done if it got into criminal hands. So we're all more of a target for cybercrime than we potentially realise. But beyond that, I think a lot of people don't realise that a lot of cybercrime is not targeted. A lot of it is like a paint splatter that can go everywhere, and in which lots of people and organisations can be caught up as collateral damage. We only have to look at the NotPetya attacks a few years ago, in which allegedly Russia was targeting the Ukraine, but many other countries, many other organizations in over 60 countries were impacted as collateral damage. For example, the shipping giant Maersk, which had an enormous impact on them, reportedly costing them over $300 million to recover from. So this is the untargeted nature of a lot of cyber activity. We can think of cyber criminals essentially casting a net and seeing which individuals, which organizations get caught up in it. We don't have to be targeted, unfortunately, to be a victim of cybercrime. However, when we are targeted, cybercriminals will often follow a particular methodology. To begin with, if they have a target in mind, or if they're looking for a target or set of targets, they will begin doing research, like we all do, on the internet. They will carry out initial reconnaissance, whereby they will look at the company website, they will look at potentially what they can find about the company on the dark web, any credentials that maybe have been breached and are for sale on the dark web. They will look at company records, they will look at the company being mentioned in the press, any information they can gather, for example, job adverts that maybe mention the systems and the software being used in the organization. And they will look at the employees on social media. They will see what information they can piece together across different social platforms. They can work out the structure of the organization, who works for who, and maybe get some information that they can use then to attempt initial access into the organization. Most commonly, they will use phishing attacks to try to gain initial access. For example, enticing somebody to click a link, download an attachment, calling somebody up and trying to convince them to give their username and password. They will use all sorts of different scenarios, of course, to do this. For example, last year, Twitter had an incident. It hit the headlines around the world. It was when many employees at Twitter went to working from home, and they received telephone calls from people posing as the IT team at Twitter, saying they needed the username and password to be able to set them up properly with remote access. Of course, these were cyber criminals carrying out social engineering to get that initial access into the systems. Once they have initial access, they will then look to escalate the attack. So they will look to have privilege escalation, so to move so that they have more access, a greater level of access than just the average end user has. They will look to make movement across the network, lateral movement, so that they can compromise more and more machines, get access to more data. So once they have that initial access, they will be installing more hacking tools to increase their level of access and the level of data that they can get access to. Once they have escalated their privileges, they will then move on to another phase of intelligence gathering. This is from within the organization. This is being on the network, seeing what good looks like, what normal looks like on the network, so that they can stay under the radar and gather more information to carry out their attacks. It will also be about working out how the organization works, where information is held, what systems might be most valuable. They can sometimes be doing this for many months without being identified before they carry out their final objective. The final objective can be stealing information, stealing money, it can be causing disruption, or it could be pivoting to another organization that their initial victim works with, a supply chain attack, where they actually don't go for the end target to begin with, they compromise an organization within the supply chain to get to the end target. Why is there a picture of Swiss cheese on the screen? Well, the picture of Swiss cheese represents the fact that there are always holes in the security of an organization. There is no such thing as 100% security. What we don't want is a hole running all the way through. So we may find that criminals are able to carry out reconnaissance. They maybe even will get initial access, but we want to try and stop them before they escalate their privileges. We want to try and stop them before they can gather more intelligence. We want to be able to stop them before they complete their final objective. So we really all play a role in stopping cybercriminals from getting through the full stage. And if we can stop them before they carry out their objective, we may be able to stop any damage from actually being done. I mentioned initial access, and the most common way for cybercriminals to gain that initial access is with phishing. The Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, released every year, looks at incidents around the world to see which are the trends, what trends can we attribute, what lessons can we learn. The big headline this year was that 85% of data breaches had a human element. My question is, what are the remaining 15%? Because in my experience, and as far as I can tell, there is no way there could be a data breach that doesn't have a human element. Putting that to one side, the good news from Verizon was that human error has declined as a cause of incident. However, they have said that phishing is still the number one vector, still the number one way in which organizations are compromised, and credentials. They are the data that cybercriminals are most looking to steal, our usernames and our passwords, because once they have the username and passwords, they can essentially pose as us. This is supported by findings at Club CISO, which found when asking what was the cause of any material cybersecurity incident that you had in the last year, we found, thankfully, the majority of respondents had no material breach. They'd maybe had a breach, but they hadn't had a material breach that had a big impact. But beyond that, the most common cause of a material breach was social engineering. What's interesting is when we look at any cause of a breach here, we can see a human element in absolutely all of them, even something that maybe looks more technical on the face of it, misconfigured systems, externally exposed vulnerability. Of course, there is still very strongly a human element involved in that. But when it comes to social engineering, we can think of this a little bit like the wolf in sheep's clothing. So this is a cybercriminal or a group of cybercriminals who pose as somebody or something, an organization that you know and trust, and they convince you using well-known psychological triggers to give over information, to give over money, to click a link, download an attachment, share something that you shouldn't and otherwise wouldn't with them. How does this work, and how are we all susceptible to it? Well, ultimately, we can understand this by thinking about the human brain. We can look to behavioral economics, books like Nudge, which explain that we have two ways of processing information. A great analogy of this comes from Nudge, which helps us understand that one way of thinking is a bit like Spock. We can process information in a calm, careful, and considered way where we're very rational and we think about possible unintended consequences of our actions. When we're thinking like Spock, we're very hard to manipulate. So cybercriminals want to push us into the other way of processing information, which is the Homer way of processing information, where we are emotional, impulsive, and we don't think about possible unintended consequences of our actions. When we are in this so-called hot state, we're much easier to manipulate because we're not thinking clearly. Our judgment is clouded. One of the well-known triggers to push us into this more clouded way of thinking is, of course, fear, anxiety. Fear is not helpful for initiating long-term behavioral change, but it's very powerful if we're trying to influence a short-term behavior. So if you're just trying to get somebody to click a link, fear can be very powerful. And unfortunately, what we've had with COVID-19 and the pandemic has been essentially a perfect storm for cyber criminals to take advantage of. We have all generally been in a state of more heightened emotion. We have been anxious about the pandemic. The information has been changing rapidly and we have wanted to keep up with it. So cyber criminals have had a lot of ammunition that they can use, and they certainly have done so. Phishing has risen over the last year or so, and COVID-19 is now the biggest theme of phishing emails we have ever seen on a global scale. So there have been many examples, and there continue to be many examples of phishing emails taking advantage of our concern and our desire for information about COVID-19. So what can we do about it? Well, firstly, it's about understanding that our best defense for cybersecurity starts with the culture. The culture of an organization is so important when it comes to cybersecurity because the human element of cybersecurity is so important. Culture is the foundation upon which every other element of cybersecurity is built in an organization, whether it is from malicious insider activity to people reporting incidents, to people engaging with the security team and making sure that they're working in a secure manner. It's been recognized increasingly over recent years, the importance of culture when it comes to security. So Club CISO, again, when we surveyed our members earlier this year, we found that security culture was the #1 hot topic for them, the #1 topic that they were looking at for the year ahead. They have given this answer for the last 3 years in a row. And this year, security culture tied with cloud as being their most important priority. When we think about the year that cloud has had with the pandemic, with the forced digital transformation that many organizations have been through, I think it's very telling that security leaders are still saying that culture is of primary importance to them. The saying that I like to use is that a mature cybersecurity culture will eat breaches for breakfast. If you have a mature cybersecurity culture, it is one of your strongest elements of defense because it means everybody is working together as part of a positive and robust security culture. The fundamental thing that organizations can do when building a security culture is to not engage in trying to scare their employees with the cybersecurity threat. People are put off from messaging. Psychologically, we do not take to negative messaging. And this is because of the optimism bias. So neuroscientists have proven Tali Sharot's work is absolutely world leading in this regard of the optimism bias. So about 80% of people around the world are wired towards optimism in their personal lives. This is why most people think that cyber criminals would never want their data, because we don't think the bad thing will happen to us, and no amount of statistics will convince us otherwise. So using negative messaging actually puts people off engaging in cybersecurity. It makes people think that we are overblowing the threat, or it doesn't apply to them, or it makes them bury their head in the sand and simply not listen to us. Instead, if we use positive messaging, people are far more likely to engage with what we're saying. We can help bring them along and empower them. Decades of research in psychology looking at the psychology of fear, looking at fear appeals, have found that when we're talking about a scary subject, actually talking about self-efficacy, what people can do to better protect themselves, building up their levels of empowerment, that is the most effective strategy we can take. So to summarize my messages from today, people are central to every element of cybersecurity. Social engineering works because it subverts trust and it exploits human bias. This is why we are all susceptible to social engineering. The right fish at the wrong time can catch any of us. Security culture is the foundation to security maturity. And to build a positive and robust security culture, we need to draw positivity out of negativity. Cybersecurity can very easily be a negative subject. We are looking for problems and flaws. We are talking about threats, but we need to focus on how we can frame our messaging in a more positive and empowering way if we want to bring people with us and positively influence their behaviours. And it's most important that we build the self-efficacy of those around us if we want to continue to engage and positively influence them. Thank you so much for your time. Muchas gracias. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation.